1917, the United Kingdom. The country was in the middle of World War I, which costed the lives of more than 7,500,000 men and was proven to be a financial disaster. Disease and starvation were rampant in London, especially in its slums, only to be aggravated by the outbreak of the Spanish flu. Despite the best propagandistic efforts, everyone was convinced that the greatest empire in history was at the breaking point. A 10-year-old Frances Griffiths was left stranded in Cottingley, England, after her father was sent to fight in France. She enjoyed the company of her cousin, Elsie Wright, her mother, and her uncle's family. In July of 1917, Frances and Elsie borrowed a camera from Mr. Wright's darkroom and took a picture that would begin one of the most controversial supernatural mythologies in British history. Different versions tell different stories on why Frances and Elsie began taking these pictures and how they had access to this camera, which was very advanced for the time. However, most sources agree that once Mr. Wright finished processing the first of the girls' pictures and saw the fairies, he reportedly dismissed it all as joke. However, Frances' mother, Polly Wright, attended a lecture of the Theosophical Society on Fairy Life in 1919, where she enthusiastically showed its leader, Mr. Edward Gardner, the first pictures that the girls produced, and after a 3-year hiatus, they produced 3 more pictures with fairies in 1920 at the origin of Mrs. Wright. It happened that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes stories and a fervent spiritualist, was assigned to write an article on fairy mythology by The Strand, a widely popular magazine that published both fiction and factual articles on various topics, and that had its peak circulation during World War I. Once Doyle obtained these photos, he wrote an article explaining the sighting of fairies and calling it an epoch-making event. The news caused some international attention. In Australia, Sydney's Truth in 1921 provided an skeptical assessment of the sightings, saying that, for the true explanation of these fairy photographs, what is wanted is not a knowledge of occult phenomena, but a knowledge of children. The press in the United States and Canada also extensively covered the incident for a short period of time, with their branch of the Strand publishing Doyle's article, and with the eminent author giving a series of lectures across both countries on the topic. The peak of its spread came when Doyle himself authored a book by the title The Coming of the Fairies in 1921. However, interest in the fairies and the girls ceased after they were reportedly fed up with fairies and stopped taking pictures. There were prominent figures who stood by Doyle and the girls. Novelist Henry de Vere Stackpole went as far as saying, "Look at Frances' face, look at Elsie's face. There is an extraordinary thing called truth, which has 10 million faces and forms. It is God's currency, and the cleverest coiner or forger can't imitate it." Margaret Macmillan, a well-known contemporary social reformer and who was an ardent proponent of subsidized healthcare for children, commented in an uncommitting tone, "How wonderful that to these dear children such a wonderful gift has been vouchsafed." It wasn't until 1983 that Frances and Elsie admitted that the photographs were faked. The fairies had come from quotable figures in coloring books. However, they always believed that real fairies existed. Connors and Wetherell's The Misinformation Age best models how this story was effective in conquering the minds and hearts of the British public. The authors utilized various models to explain how beliefs spread through a community. They utilize models to represent individuals and connections to represent the relationship between them. Some of these models are cluster and star networks, called so because of their shapes. We can model the initial spread of the Cottingley Fairies story by applying these models. The initial user base of believers were the members of Mr. Gardner's Theosophical Society, where Polly Wright showed the first 2 films of the fairy photos in 1919. From the moment that Gardner took an interest in these films and began promoting them among users, contemporary spiritualists in Great Britain behaved much like Connors and Wetherell's cluster network. A group of people who have little intellectual discourse outside of their circle and begin holding a belief, and so being shot from other perspectives, begin reinforcing that belief between themselves until all members of the network believe it. The probability that an individual spiritualist or node acquired the belief was high. They already believed in facts that went unsupported by scientific evidence and were more likely to believe in the words of their congregation members. Thus, It is easy to conclude that the entire self-reinforcing network of rich spiritualists quickly adopted the belief in fairies. How did this belief break out to the general public? The misinformation age offers yet another model that best explains this. Once Stoic published his article on the Strand, many contemporary influencers began reporting on the case and commenting on it, as it had been discussed previously. In this case, the spread was best modeled by the Star Network, in which Stoic, the central figure, spread his beliefs to other important figures in public discourse, increasing the reach and societal importance of the Cottingley Fairies. Daniel Levitin explains the concept of counter-knowledge in his book Weaponized Lie. He implies it to mean false facts spread by conspiracy theories or public figures that contradict supposedly false mainstream facts. In this case, Conan Doyle asked as that public figure by insisting throughout his lifetime that fairies were real, which starkly contradicted the mainstream fact that fairies did not exist. The widespread coverage of his position, rather than that of any evidence to support his claim, probably caused many to hold this belief during these times. But why? Why do we care about a bunch of 1920 fake fairies? According to the Psychology of Fake News, an article in NPR written by Tania Lombroso, believing in counter-knowledge or fake news is more about flag-waving than convincing. People tend to believe in stories that reaffirm their beliefs or that are psychologically comforting. In the case of the Cottingley Fairies, many among the British chose to believe in a literal fairy tale as an expression of their faith in the natural. It is likely that many assumed the divine and unseen to exist before reading their story, and the sighting of fairies only confirmed those beliefs and strengthened their faith in religion and hope for salvation. Given the historical context in which this fake news story developed, it is not surprising that there were thousands of readers willing to find comfort on the supernatural when their loved ones were not returning from World War I, or they were left destitute, or dying from the Spanish flu. Today, we are in our most difficult time in decades and very vulnerable to find solace in falsehood. I am not asking you to be like Descartes, who believed in nothing but the existence of his own consciousness. Instead, be an informed news consumer. Always check the credentials of those that propagate sweeping and unlikely claims. Always check your news with trustworthy sources. Finally, if you feel the necessity to deposit your hopes on something that seems distant from reality, remember that it is easy to fall in the same trap that those who believe in the Cottingley Fairies fell for. Thank you very much.